Good morning, everyone. I welcome you all to the ICANN initiative, the Hindu and Indian Express analysis. We will start with the personality of the day. We will be talking today about Pratap NM. So, this personality of the day was suggested by someone in the comment section. So, I further read about it and I found that the version that the Prime Minister has asked him to be absorbed in DRDO or that and being awarded by the Prime Minister. This may not be true. I'm not sure. I didn't get the correct version of it. But so we will discuss related to regarding this person, what has been his journey and what has been his contribution. So the Pratap NM is popularly also known as drone scientist. So he has designed more than 600 drones till date. So first of all, he doesn't have any specific qualification regarding such a design of drones or anything. So without that, he is so passionate about his work that he has designed over 600 drones for various purposes. Second, he is building his drones by collecting some VE wastes. So even from the motor of the grinder and all, he has built some drones. So which shows how innovative the youth can be and how innovative use they can put the commonly available materials. So this has also made his drones very cost effective, which is very important for a developing country like India. And third is that he has been able to help various Indian agencies and other governments across the world for over various projects. So the first thing we can mention is in 2009 when Karnataka saw floods. Then that time Pratap NM's drone was used to provide food and relief materials to the affected areas. And he proudly recounts about an incident that happened in Africa where he says that there is a very dangerously poisonous snake there called as black mamba. So if the snake bites, then a person will have to be given anti-venom within 15 minutes. Otherwise, a person is not going to die. So once when he was there in Sudan over some project, then he got the news that in the tribal area, the snake has bitten a small 8-year-old girl. So immediate assistance was required. But then that place was nearly 10 hours by road, and he used his Eagle 2.8 drone, which had the speed of 280 kilometers per hour. And he was able to supply the anti-venom to the girl within 8.5 minutes, and he was able to save the life of the girl. So later on, both the girl and her mother, they came back to Sudan only to thank Pratap that he had saved their lives, which seemed impossible for them. So now Pratap is currently working on establishing his own startup so that he can involve youngsters who can build drones and other innovative devices. So this whole thing shows, first of all, the application or the role of technology in solving various problems that a country is facing. So you can use this as a beginning for an essay which is on technology. So there was one essay in 2013, I think, which said technology is a double-edged sword or something. So in such cases, you can use this as an opening that how technology can be so helpful and it can be used for various welfare and security purposes. The next thing is that Pratap doesn't have any proper degree or certification for the kind of work he is doing. So, but he really had that passion to do something for the country, and this shows how our education system also needs to be reformed. That we need to build on the passion of students and train them in what they are passionate about. So this again can be the application, and also that this whole thing highlights the problem of research and recognition in India. So in today our country is seeing brain drain and many people, talented people who are going out to various other countries because they have good opportunities there. But the talent of such people are not being recognized in India. So that should come to an end, and we must provide a conducive environment to our own budding young scientists. Then this also shows the importance that the youth and the startups, the innovation can play a role in the development of the country. And then it also can be used to highlight qualities of determination, vision, endurance, dedication, and knowledge, which has helped the person to come out of the vicious cycle of poverty. We will start with the first topic of the day, which is a nuclear arms issue. So, this editorial was on China, which is increasing its nuclear arsenal. So, this is a fact that is worrisome for India. So, first is China is modernizing its nuclear arsenal, And why it is modernizing? Because United States has multi-layered missile defense capabilities. So in order to counter this, China wants to improve and modernize its nuclear arsenal. So because United States has multi-layered missile defense capabilities and US already has much higher nuclear arsenal with it, so China also wants to modernize to counter the United States. But this has a bearing on relations with India as well, because now there is a recent Galvan standoff, and we cannot afford to be more aggressive, because if we have two nuclear powers across our borders, the threat of the nuclear war is going to be more. So in this backdrop, we are going to see what has been China's actions regarding how it has been increasing its nuclear arsenal. So the first is the missiles. China already has the medium range ballistic missiles and also the short range ballistic missiles. So China already has these missiles, and apart from that, China is also carrying out a testing. So China had put this moratorium in 1996 that it is not going to adopt a hot testing. So because of this moratorium on hot testing, China is now conducting subcritical testing. So subcritical testing has happened in Lopnur, which is a site in China where the subcritical testing has happened. With respect to new designs, China is now basically focusing on miniaturization. So miniaturization, it is focusing and developing new warheads. So then is the fissile material. China also has a sizable inventory of the fissile material. So according to the International Panel on Fissile Materials, it is estimated that China has nearly 2.9 plus or minus 0.6 metric tons of fissile material. But compare this with India, which just has some 0.6 plus or minus 0.15 tons of weapon grade plutonium. So this shows that China already has a sizable amount of fissile material with it, which it can use to further increase its nuclear arsenal. So therefore, according to the SIPRI report, which we have already seen before, this is a graph of the yellow shows the 2019 data and the blue shows 2020 data. So this is China, this is Pakistan, and this is India. So China, it was 290, which is increased to 320. For Pakistan, it was 150, which is increased to 160, and for India from to 130. So you can make this graphical representation in your answers, so which will add more value to your answer. So this is a SIPRI report, that is a Stockholm International Peace Report Institute. So this has observed that this whole graph shows how China and Pakistan, their nuclear arsenal is more than that of India's, and China's is much more than that of India's. So we were talking the other day about India's two-front war with Pakistan and China. So we have two hostile neighbors who are nuclear capable. So therefore, aggression across the border is bad for all the countries in the neighborhood. So this is a cause of concern for India, and whatever will be our response to the border clashes that are happening. In fact, for all the three countries, we must always make sure that these border conflicts are resolved in a peaceful bilateral manner, and it is not allowed to escalate to a point where the countries may start using the nuclear weapons. So this you can use it with respect to India-China relations, and also in the topic of the nuclear arms race. So now the topic, which is again the South China Sea issue. So we have already several times discussed the South China Sea issue. So in this editorial, there was just a brief time that was given about the recent timeline only regarding the South China Sea issue. So in the year 2013, Philippines had approached the tribunal under the UNCLOS. So the Permanent Court of Arbitration, the dispute was taken to the Permanent Court of Arbitration by Philippines. And in 2013, it gave a verdict. So it says that the China's claim of 9-dash line and saying that whatever falls within it is the Chinese territory. So that is not so the case. So in fact, the PCA verdict, it said that the China's 9-dash line has no legal basis. So this completely diluted China's claim in the South China Sea, and therefore China did not welcome this verdict, and it termed that this judgment is null and void. So this happened in 2013 with the Permanent Court of Arbitration verdict. So then China undermines this verdict, and it continues to engage in various activities illegally in the South China Sea. So China kept on violating the exclusive economic zone of various countries like the Philippines, and it also started undertaking land reclamation activities, that is constructing some artificial islands, and that led to harming of the environment also, apart from entering in the EEZ of these countries and violating their sovereignty. But finally, the ASEAN countries came to a point when they felt that the dispute needs to be settled bilaterally, and China and the ASEAN countries, they started working on a code of conduct that will govern the relations between these countries in the South China Sea. So then came this code of conduct. So then there were deepening economic ties. So the ties between these countries, the other countries who are claiming the South China Sea and China, there is a deepening economic ties. Because of the economic dependencies these countries had on China, it became very difficult for these countries to take a tough stand against China. So, therefore, even though in reality there was a growing discontent, these countries were not very vocal in opposing China's conduct in the South China Sea. However, what these countries started was improving their military ties. So, when they were not able to vocally object and obstruct the Chinese activities in the region because of the economic dependencies on China, they started to strengthen their military and also establish military ties with countries like Japan, United States, etc. So, as a part of this, you can give examples of Vietnam. So, Vietnam has added 6 Kilo class Russian origin submarines. So, Kilo class submarines from Russia, Vietnam has added to its navy. Similarly, stealth ships in Singapore have been added to the Singapore's military preparedness. Then patrol boats have been given to Vietnam by India also. Then Indonesia is now working on upgrading its coast guard. So like that, various these countries in the South China Sea region, they are developing and deepening their military ties, holding joint exercises, etc., with the other countries, and also improving their own military preparedness. But however, you can see that now also there is growing Chinese aggression in the region, there is growing Chinese muscularity in the region. We have already seen several examples to show the Chinese increasing muscularity. So it rammed against the fishing boats. Then it is also claiming the Natuna Islands, which is also claimed by Indonesia. Then the Chinese naval vessels are patrolling these areas. China is even going to the extent of renaming several South China Sea features based on some Chinese names. So these have been the instances where China has shown its aggression and muscularity. So now after the timeline comes what has to be the way forward, particularly for India. What should be the way forward? The first thing is to have a good defense diplomacy with the countries in the South China Sea region. So as far as this is concerned, one is the military training, which in which case the countries can cooperate and exchange military training experiences and exercises. Then conduct joint exercises in this region. Then go for military exchanges. Apart from that, also focus on humanitarian assistance and disaster relief HADR activities. Then also shared patrolling, joint patrolling can be done in this Indo-Pacific and the South China Sea region, particularly in the Malacca Strait. So joint patrolling can be done. So these are the various ways through which India will have to establish its defense diplomatic relations with the countries in the South China Sea. The second step that India has to take is to deepen the comprehensive strategic partnerships that India has with the countries in the region. So India has comprehensive strategic partnerships with Australia, with Japan, Indonesia, United States, and Vietnam also. So this comprehensive strategic partnership we can extend to Malaysia, Philippines, Thailand, and Singapore. So to other countries in the South China Sea region also this comprehensive strategic partnership could be increased. So this is the second measure that India can take. The third is to strengthen India's Tri-Service Command. So we have a Tri-Service Command that is stationed in the Andaman and Nicobar. So this is of immense geostrategic value for us because Andaman and Nicobar is the closest of Indian part, which is very close to the South China Sea region. So realizing the geostrategic importance of Andaman and Nicobar, we need to further strengthen the military capacity of this Tri-Command Andaman and Nicobar, Tri-Service Andaman and Nicobar Command. So this is the third measure that India can take with respect to the South China Sea dispute. So this brings us to the end of this topic. Now we'll move on to the next topic, which is the issue of reservation. So this particular editorial, it first gives a lot of data as to what has been the percentage of reservation in the past and in the present compared to the percentage of the population. So 2 to 3 paragraphs have been devoted only to presenting this data, which is very difficult to understand. So you can represent that using this form of tabular columns. So this we are talking only about the Group A services, and the data is for the SCs and the OBCs. This is Central Administrative Services, and this is the Central Public Sector Undertakings. So in this, when we talk about the SCs form 16% of the population. So, but their reservation or their representation in the Central Administrative Services is 13%, whereas in the Central Public Sector Undertakings, it is 18%. And during, if you look at the SC's literacy rate has jumped from 21% in 1980s. It has jumped to 66% in 2011. In spite of such a huge jump in the literacy rate of SCs, their percentage or their representation in the Central Administrative Service and the CPSUs is less compared to their proportionate to their population. So next we come to the OBCs. For OBCs, the benefit of reservation started a little late after the Mandal Commission report was accepted and implemented by the VP Singh government. So OBCs form 52% of the population. So, but their representation in the Central Administrative Service is 8.4%. In the CPSUs, it is 28.5%. So this data shows that clearly that was compared to the proportion of their population, their representation, particularly in the Group A services, is very less. So in regard, this editorial goes on to discuss that in the recent times, there has been dilution of reservations. So let's see in what all ways this dilution has been there. One is the privatization. Why privatization? Now recently the finance minister also announced the new program of privatization. So according to this new public sector enterprise policy, it says that there will at most be some 4 public sector enterprises. Apart from this, the rest are going to be either merged or they are going to be privatized. So therefore, there is a drive towards privatization, and the reservation and the quota system applies only to the public sector, and the reservation is not applicable to the private sector. So when government is on this way to privatize most of the enterprises and just keep some 3 to 4 enterprises in the public sector, so therefore this privatization is also going to dilute the reservation system. The next is related to the vacancies. So in this, you can talk about the UPSC's own vacancy. So the number of civil service candidates also who are shortlisted by the UPSC, even they have dropped almost between 2014 and 2018. There is a 40% drop in the number of people who are shortlisted by UPSC. So this was in 2014, it was 1,200 something, and in 2018, it was just 760. So this shows a 40% drop in the number of people shortlisted by UPSC. So this again, as we're talking about the Group A services, so the vacancies itself has dropped over a period of time. So that is why reservation has also proportionately seen a drop. The next reason is a lateral entry. So lateral entry is one thing which the current government has been promoting, where it wants to get experience and expertise from the private sector, from outside, and to be able to absorb such an expertise and skill for the welfare of the nation. So lateral entry is encouraged by the current government, and that will definitely then undermine the reservation system, because for lateral entry, quotas do not apply. Reservation doesn't apply for lateral entry. So this is another reason for decline in the reservations. Next is the article also says that some court rulings have also gone against the spirit of reservation. For instance, very recently, this year Supreme Court told that it has ruled that reservation that are happening in job promotions, it is not fundamental right. So reservation in job promotion is not a fundamental right. So this was held by the Supreme Court. So these kind of rulings they go against the spirit of reservation. But contrarily, the Constitution's own articles like Article 16(4)(a) and even the government has decided that it wouldn't contest this ruling by the court. So it is not going to question this ruling by the court. So this has been decided by the government also. So such court rulings are also going to reduce the spirit of. And next is also the fact that the whatever quota has been assigned is also not being filled. So one example for this is that the National Commission for Backward Classes, the NCBC, issued a notice to the Health Ministry. So what was happening under the NEET, the National Eligibility Cum Entrance Test, under the NEET, the OBCs who had to be provided 27% of quota in the All India seats from the polled seats from various colleges. So there was a loss of nearly 10,000 seats in a span of 3 years. So that this 27% quota was not being fulfilled, and that has led to a loss of 10,000 seats over a period of 3 years for the OBCs. So this number of seats has then been transferred to the general category. So this also shows how in the government's own departments, the quota that has been allocated to the backward sections are not being completely filled. So this is another reason. So then also at the bottom of this issue is the funding. The funds which have been earmarked for Dalits education in the budget itself has seen a decline in the past few years. So for this Dalit budget, that comes under the what is called as a special component plan. So the special component plan has also, and the budget allocated to the Dalits has also seen a reduction compared to what has been the demographic weight of the Dalits. So what should have been allocated to them, there is a comparative decline compared to that. That is, if we see that the demographic weight of the Dalits, if it is 16.6%, then the budget allocation within the special component plan has fluctuated between 9 to 6.5%. So therefore, because of less funding, because of less budget allocation, even the scholarship funds which should have been given to various Dalit children has also seen a drastic fall. So this has affected various Dalit children, and many have not received scholarship, and many have received the scholarship after a lot of delays. So this funding issue is also there. So this whole article was on reservation, the reasons for fall in the reservations, and the funding issue which is being fixed. Now we will look at the India-West Asia relations. So the recent news has been that in Kuwait, a decision has been taken that the expatriates in the workforce are going to be reduced. So which means Indian citizens who are serving, who are doing some jobs in Kuwait, they should not exceed 15% of the Kuwait's population, which means nearly 8 lakh Indians who are now having some jobs in Kuwait will have to leave Kuwait. So this is not the first country in the West Asian region to adopt such policies. Even before, Saudi Arabia in 2011 itself started with a scheme called as Netakat. So again, under Netakat, the main aim was to provide more jobs to the local population and to reduce the proportion of expatriates in the various jobs in Saudi Arabia. So even Oman has proposed a phased reduction of the expatriates in the economy and in the workforce. So this has been happening. So first we'll have to understand why there are so many expatriate workers in West Asia. First is the oil boom. So in the 1960s and in the 1970s, there was oil boom, and these economies, they were looking for people who could work in the oil economies. So because of this oil boom, it attracted workers from particularly from India, where they could work in these Gulf countries and run the economies which were seeing this oil boom. Second is the skill and the will. So many among the local population in these countries, they didn't have the necessary skills, nor were they willing to meet the needs of the oil industry. So because the Indian expatriates had that skill, so India exported both unskilled, skilled, semi-skilled, all kind of people were there from India there. So therefore they were able to meet the skill level, and also they were willing to work in this field in these Gulf countries. So these are the two reasons why a lot of Indian expatriate workers are present in countries. But then why is there a change in the policy in these countries now? First is that these countries are themselves seeing an economic slowdown. So they are unable to generate more jobs, and not just generating new jobs, but even the existing jobs are being lost because of the slowdown. So companies are being forced to lay off many of the workers. So there is a slowdown in the economy. Second reason is a working age population. Now these countries have their own large indigenous population in the working age. So these population in the working age need to be given job opportunities. So it is because of these two reasons that the countries in the Gulf region and the West Asian region, they want to reduce the proportion of expat workers in their economy and increase the job availability to the local population. Now also because of COVID, it is very difficult to plan for any economic revival, and that is also forcing these countries to now phase down the expat workers and increase jobs for the local population. So this was about West Asia, because we have a lot of diaspora presence in that region and a lot of remittance coming from that region. So the policies of these countries is going to impact the have impact on India also, because many of these expat workers who are losing jobs there are going to return back to India. So that is an issue connected with India. Second, they were till now doing remittances, which was a very important source for foreign exchange in India. So that is again going to reduce, which is again of direct interest to India. So because of this, one example is we can take of Kerala. So in the past, once after the COVID has struck, many migrants from the West Asia, from the Gulf countries have migrated back to Kerala, because they have lost jobs, or they have come on their own because of the rising infections in the region. So Kerala has announced what is called as a Dream Kerala project. So under the Dream Kerala project, it is going to support those workers who are returning from West Asian countries. So it is going to undertake several welfare measures for them. So till now, 1.5 lakh people have already returned from the Gulf countries once the COVID-19 outbreak started. And out of them, nearly 70,000 people have even lost their jobs. They have returned because they have lost jobs also. So the challenge is going to be big, because these returnees will have to be accommodated in the society, and they will also be have to given jobs. These people will now start looking for jobs. So more jobs needs to be created as well. So this is a challenge for those states from where large number of expatriate workers were there. So we now move on to the next topic, which is a midday meal scheme. So the recent news has been that in the Indian Express had highlighted this issue about Bhagalpur, Bihar. So in Bhagalpur, Bihar, due to the COVID crisis, the schools were shut down, and the children did not get the midday meal which they were supposed to get. So in the absence of the nutritious meal, these children have now taken up rack picking, because the scheme has been suspended now, had come to a standstill because of the COVID and the lockdown. So schools were shut, the children didn't get their midday meals, so they had taken up rack picking. So it was this issue that is a context for this editorial, for this article. Based on this news, in fact, the NHRC and also the Patna High Court have taken cognizance of this issue, and they have issued order statewide that there has to be distribution of rations to school children for 3 months, and also money should be transferred to the accounts of their parents or guardians. Instead, this money could be used for providing food to children. So they must be given ration to the school children should be given for 3 months, and money should be transferred to the account of their parents or guardians. So this was the order that has been issued state-wise. But however, several experts are of the view that the child health experts, they say that the dry rations are not a substitute for cooked food. So cooked food is a source of holistic nutrition, but dry ration, there is no guarantee that it leads to the nutrition intake by the children. So dry rations are not a substitute for cooked meals. So in the past, when the midday meal scheme was launched, it was launched for two main purposes. One is to ensure that the children don't drop out, and there is more admission into the school to increase the enrollment in the school. So that because parents feel that if my child is enrolled in the school, at least one meal is guaranteed per day, nutrition meal is guaranteed. So therefore the enrollment in the schools increased, and also the nutritional outcomes also improved. So the children had a better nutritional status. So one is enrollment, so that there is education is provided to children, and the other is a nutritional outcomes. These were the two important benefits of the midday meal scheme. When we talk of a small timeline related to the scheme, it was first launched in the 1960s in Tamil Nadu. So when in Tamil Nadu it became a huge success, even the central government launched that in 1995. So after that, various other state governments, they were giving dry rations to the children. But later on, it was the Supreme Court order in 2001 where Supreme Court held that it should not be the dry rations, rather cooked meals should be introduced to the children in the schools. So children should be given cooked meals. So under the midday meal scheme also, we have specific guidelines as to how much amount of calories and proteins need to be given. So at least 300 calories and 8 to 12 grams of proteins need to be given through this cooked food to the students in the schools. So this also led to improvement in their nutritional status. So this is about the performance of welfare schemes. So you have a specific topic in your GS2 syllabus which talks about the welfare schemes of the welfare schemes for various vulnerable sections of the population. So you have to have a brief about various welfare schemes, important ones which are being run by the government, and a critical analysis of how they are performing. So some positives and negatives. So whatever comes in the news, at least you have to be ready for that. So there were other editorials which weren't important. This disengagement is a current disengagement that is going on between the India and China, the Galwan hot springs and the Gogra. Then this was not relevant, and again this was about the custodial torture, which again we have covered in detail. Then this again, virus and the lockdown, it says that the lockdown actually led to the faster spread of the virus. So again, completely related to COVID and not much relevant for the exam. So this is about the Bulbul series on Netflix again, which is not relevant from exam. Then this also again related to China, which is not. So now we'll be discussing yesterday's question. So the question is discuss the issue of criminalization of politics and suggest a way forward. So the first thing is to start with some data or something which shows that there is criminalization of politics. So we will start with the 2019 and 20 ADR report. ADR is Association for Democratic Reforms. It's an NGO. So ADR report in 2019-20, which has highlighted the urgency of this issue. So it says that it was 14% criminalization in 2009 Lok Sabha. Then it was 21% of the MPs had criminal records where it was 2014 Lok Sabha, and now it is 29% in 2019 Lok Sabha. So therefore the presence of the criminal MPs has only increased. So after giving an introduction about the criminalization and the extent of criminalization, we can start talking about the reasons for it. I'm just giving a brief about the entire topic. So one is the data, which is very important to give an introduction with. Next is the reasons for criminalization. You can say that because elections are considered as an end in themselves, they need to be won at any cost. So this is making the politicians to collaborate with the criminals so that they use muscle power, money power, and somehow at any cost they are able to win elections. So elections are seen as an end in themselves, not as a means to an end. So next is that the criminalization, it brings in muscle power and money power. So the money power is very important for fighting the elections. So and then is also the lack of governance. So if there is a relatively weak governance, and then people somehow want that they get better governance and there is better delivery of public goods for them. So in that, this has allowed the voters to elect candidates despite their dubious credentials. So there is this weakness or the lack of governance that is also a reason for this. Next is a lack of political will. So politicians, they themselves know that there is a benefit of associating with the criminals. So therefore, there is a lack of political will to tackle this tendency of criminalization in politics. Then there are also narrow self-interests. Narrow self-interest, why? Because some voters may take the view that such candidates will represent their community, their castes, etc. So, either by hook or crook, they will safeguard the interests of their community. So, even if they have some criminal antecedents, it doesn't matter to such kind of people with who have narrow self-interests. And another reason is also the lack of choices. So, all those candidates who are on fray have some or the other criminal record. So, which can be serious, heinous, or it can be even petty. So there is also a lack of choice for on part of the people to vote those candidates who have clean records. So that is another thing. And also the reason is that even when the disclosure happens regarding criminal antecedents, but nobody, an average common citizen, a layman, doesn't know to check out these criminal records of the contestants which has been disclosed, and based on upon that make a decision as to whom to vote. So this scrutiny doesn't happen. And another reason for criminalization is that in our laws itself, there are few provisions. For example, in the Representation of People Act. So earlier, the provision was that even if a person is convicted and within a period of 3 months he is able to appeal in the higher court, then he can continue as a legislator without attracting any disqualification. So such laws also, and then once it goes on an appeal in the higher court, and the higher court will then take its own time to settle the issue. So because of delay in the justice or delay in the decisions by the courts also, it is a big incentive for the legislators to even with criminal antecedents to participate, because they feel that either way judiciary is going to take its own time by the time they are convicted, so they will not attract any disqualification. So the failure of the judicial system is also a reason for increasing criminalization. So after explaining criminalization, you can use some value addition things like you can use various Supreme Court judgments. So for that, you can use the Lily Thomas judgment in which the Supreme Court struck down Section 8(4) of the Representation of People Act. Section 8(4) of ROP is again the same thing that I just told now, that where earlier the legislators, if they were convicted by lower court, but within a period of 3 months they appealed in a higher court against their conviction, then they did not attract any disqualification. So this whole clause was struck down by the Supreme Court in the Lily Thomas case. Then you can talk about the Public Interest Foundation versus Union of India case in 2018, where the Supreme Court directed political parties to publish online the pending criminal cases of all their candidates. So the Supreme Court also told that these measures will not do much to end the tendency of criminalization in the politics. So just mere disqualification will not do anything. Rather, we should begin by cleansing the political parties itself. So that was one more thing. And then also in 2017, the Supreme Court itself asked the center to appoint these special courts. These special courts which can exclusively try the cases of these politicians and who are facing criminal charges, so that these special courts can come to a decision quickly and it is not delayed endlessly. So you can use these kinds of Supreme Court judgments to enhance the value of your answer. And you can also use some quotes. For instance, Rajendra Prasad, our former president, he had once said that if people who are elected are capable and men of character and integrity, then they make the best of even a defective constitution. But if they are lacking in these, then even the best constitution cannot help the country. So this quote is very relevant for these kinds of questions. So you can use such quotes and you can say the importance of what the legislators are there. They must have clean record, and the importance of it you can suggest. And then you can come to the way forward. In the way forward, again, you can write that the Representation of People's Act should be amended so that those persons against whom some heinous crimes cases are pending, then they should be debarred from contesting elections. Then we must have better fast track courts to decide the cases of tainted legislators more quickly. Then we must have greater transparency in campaign financing during the elections, so that it becomes less attractive for political parties to team up with the gangsters. Then Election Commission of India should have the power to break this nexus between the criminals and the politicians. So with this way forward and the measures, you can end your answer. Now, tomorrow's question will be analyze the performance of the midday meal scheme. So, as I said, it's an important aspect of GS paper 2, which is analysis of various welfare schemes. So, midday meal scheme is one of the very such prominent important schemes. So, analyze the performance of the scheme. So, that's it for today. Thank you.